Well, welcome. I want to welcome you all to Nicholson Project. This is a space dedicated to art and beauty and community and our neighbors, and to the artists and creators and connectors who make places like this come alive. And so I'm really, really pleased to have you all here to experience this space and experience this wonderful art and these beautiful artists. I'm Stephanie Reiser. I'm the founder of Nicholson Project. We're brand new, and we launched in September, and Amber is our first artist in residence. So I'm really grateful and gratified for everybody who's here today. Just some housekeeping. The bathroom is at the back of the kitchen, so please be aware of that, and please do not put the hand towels in the toilet if you can avoid it. It doesn't. The plumbing is old in this house, and it isn't happy. We also have a sign-up sheet. Please sign up so I have your contact information, and also raffle tickets if you want to be included in that. So, I'm very pleased to introduce Zoe Charlton. Zoe creates drawings that explore the ironies of contemporary social and cultural generalities. She's originally from Florida, but she received her MFA from the University of Texas at Austin, and she has participated in numerous residencies around the country and in international exhibits. She's recently been added to the collection of the Phillips collection here in DC, which is an amazing high honor. I mean, congratulations on that. Yeah, very good. And she's an associate professor of art at American University here in DC, and also holds a seat on the Maryland State Arts Council, and a co-founder of Syndicate, which I've been following for a long time on social media, and I hope to come up and see up in Baltimore. It's a collaborative art and experiential space in Baltimore. So thank you, Zoe, for being here, and I will let her introduce Amber.
Well, I'm excited to introduce Amber. Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you all for coming to hear Amber talk more about her work and her practice. I think a really great sign of a relationship is when you can't remember how you met someone, but that you know that every time you see them, you're going to have a wonderful, engaging conversation. And something that I can say about Amber in our sometimes just passing by, we will end up seeing each other and we sit and we end up talking for a long time. And one thing about Amber is present, always present, and willing to get into conversations that both of us have known we don't have time for this, but we do. And I think that that's a really special characteristic of someone. So I appreciate my relationship and my friendship with you, Amber. So I'm going to do the whole bio because Amber has a lot. So Amber is a visual artist of Puerto Rican and Caribbean descent who resides in Washington, D.C. She received her Master's of Fine Arts from Howard University, and she's been reviewed in the Washington Post, the Washington City Paper, Hyperallergic, Ebony.com, the Miami Herald, the Huffington Post, Be More Art Magazine, and the Houston Chronicle, and more. She's exhibited extensively throughout the United States, as well as in Germany, Italy, Malaysia, London, and Spain. She's created commissioned public art installations for numerous art fairs and agencies, such as the DC Commission of the Arts and Humanities, the Northern Virginia Fine Arts Association, the Humanities Council of Washington, D.C., Howard University, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, and the Washington Project for the Arts, and more. Amber is an active member of the Black Artists of DC and has held multiple roles within the organization and collective as an exhibitions coordinator, vice president, and president. She is also the co-founder of Delusions of Grandeur Artist Collective. In 2016, she participated in Back to the Roots. It's a teaching residency in Limon, Costa Rica. And in 2017, she participated in a teaching residency with the Washington Project for the Arts and the DC Public Schools. And in January, which is where I learned of another project that we hope we have time to get into to talk about, Amber participated in an artist scholar residency at the American Academy in Rome. Thank you, Amber, for being with us. And so we're going to just jump right into some questions. I remember in one of our early conversations, we talked about what it means to be an artist of our identity as Black women.
Mm-hmm.
And you stopped and said, actually, I'm Afro-Latina. You clarified your identity, and how we name ourselves is really key to how we see ourselves in the world and how we place ourselves in our multiple worlds. What does it mean to be an Afro-Latina? And what does this mean in the broader conversations about ethnic identity?
So I can't answer what it means to be Afro-Latino for anyone else. I can answer what it's meant for me. You know, I can say that part of my experience has been very odd to a certain degree, and I'll explain that because I was not raised in PR and I was not raised in the Caribbean where my family is from. So being like a transplant to some extent, I had to get it from my main source, which is my mom. So what I know about being Afro-Latina is from my mom, her name is Carmen. And what I want to say right now about that is that my mother and I just recently took a trip back to Puerto Rico. And although I've been there as a child, I hadn't been there as an adult. So this was like something I've been building up for a while. And one of the things that I was really touched by was to just take time to watch my mother in that environment. Because, you know, when we were younger, my mother worked in Afro-Latino positions where she was bilingual, so she would speak both Spanish and English, and she dealt with the communities that were multicultural. And so I could see that aspect of her come out daily. But over time, she has gone into a more child welfare organizations, being executive directors and things like that. And so the language changed for her, meaning that she wasn't speaking Spanish every day. So it influenced her differently. But going back and seeing, going to PR and seeing my mom live, because she was raised in Puerto Rico, it brought out this just energy in my mom that was amazing to see. And that's when I think about, yes, when I think about being an Afro-Latino or something, or being part of who I am, and just, and sometimes I have to just deal with the fact that people won't see that when they look at me. And that's okay, because it's not about them. It's about that feeling that I have when I hear a certain type of music, or when I see a certain type of, I don't know, like cultural events, or have a memory. I think that for me, that's what being Afro-Latina is.
And what are some more experiences that help you sort of define that part of your identity as an adult and as an artist?
You know, everything for me goes back to my mom, because she made it really essential for us to have a certain level of cultural and art exposure. And so it wasn't just like Latin America. It wasn't just Afro-Latina in relationship to being from the Caribbean. It was just wealth of information and exposure in relation to the Smithsonian's and plays, and so those things really defined like the broad stroke of what I appreciate, and what I guess is the foundation of my character, my personality.
So there are kind of intellectual and cultural and spiritual reasons, right, and ways that you've connected with different parts of your identity.
Absolutely. And some of those, you know, I had to further define as I got older, but the foundation was definitely from my mother.
Let's hear it from moms. That is right. That is right. So Amber,
I'm grateful.
Yeah. Amber works through a variety of media and processes to create paintings, videos, sculptures, and installations. And so you can see more of her specific work online on her website. When I was first introduced to your work, you were making large-scale installations made out of, I believe, tissue paper, like this paper that you shifted and crumpled.
I don't know what tissue paper. I don't think that was me.
No, there was something that was, it was like these large, broad swaths of
If it was
color.
canvas,
yes,
yes,
that it
canvas,
was canvas.
yeah, canvas,
Yeah.
and then I imposed mixed media on
Yes,
top of it.
yes.
Yeah, I think that was it's called At the Altar. Those were
Yeah.
the first 3 or 4 works that I did, and we featured them in as part of Delusions of Grandeur, which
Yes.
is the collective.
That's exactly it. Yes.
And those were, the series is called At the Altar, and it was basically a point in my life where, you know, we all go through trauma or things and family stuff, family crap sometimes. And I decided, it was, whatever I was going through was so deep, I was like, my mother and I were like, we gotta go home and make an altar.
Yeah.
And so we did that. And what I really noticed when at that process, at that time, was that I already had portions of altars in my space. I already had gatherings of things that were important, familial aspects. I already had dried roses or dried flowers and scents. But we went back and we gave more intention into the spaces, and that became really critical. And from that experience and that need to work through aspects of my own healing because of what I was going through with my family, I began to create altars with my installations, with my artwork. And so I think those are the works that you're referring to.
That is. Yeah. Thank you. So sometimes artists say, especially artists that work in a variety of media, say, I just use whatever I need to make my ideas, you know, manifest themselves. But I also think that that's a shorthand. So I wanted to ask you to walk through the process in Fertile Grounds, how you identified the material, how you decided to use it, why did you decide to install it in this way, the kind of conversation between what's happening and what's suspended and what's on the ground, and then how this layout, this format came about.
Okay, so that's a long.
It's a long one, right?
Yes. Okay, so in general, overall, the way I look at my work, the way I look at creating, sometimes it's the idea that comes first. Sometimes it's the material. I think we've talked a great deal about materiality and how I'm really, I'm kind of entrenched in materiality. So it depends on whether it's a commission, whether it's something that I see and that triggers either a memory and or almost like a dare to create with it to some degree. And that's in general. So that if that means that I'm going to create something with photography, then I will do so. Or create something with videography, then I will do so. But for this particular work, it's called Fertile Grounds of Minds, of Wombs, and of the Earth. And it is an amalgamation of things that manifest in women's bodies, but also in relation to the earth, in relation to what we put into the earth. And unfortunately, we have not figured out how to safely put into the earth and like, create a cycle that is not damaging to ourselves and to literally our land. And so I knew that I wanted to create something that was sculptural. We had already decided that it was going to be a full-size room installation. Oh my God, the spider is back. He's huge. Sorry, it is. The spider over there is absolutely huge. So I knew that I wanted to create something that had that was working geometric shapes. I knew I wanted it to be multi-layered, and I knew I wanted it to be a three-dimensional representation of a uterus, because one of the areas in which women are impacted by the effects of either stress or unmanaged energy, and or the other things that we eat, and therefore the things that are put into our food and for our medicines, is through cysts and through fibroids. And it's very rare that you see artwork that singles in on some of the health issues. And I should further contextualize that. It's not very rare. It's very rare that it gets up to a certain level of acknowledgement that artwork does. the art versus artwork that is talking about some of the other things that are definitely important, but I wanted to hold this in mind in relationship to creating something that was altar-like in relationship to have that conversation.
Right, and about our bodies.
Yes.
Right, our bodies.
Yes.
And we talked a little bit about Henrietta Lacks, right? And could you talk about the connection between the research that you were doing on Henrietta Lacks in the process of making this installation?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so in 2015, I was approached by a curator, Nicholson, who runs Prison Art there, and she was like, "Ever want to get you in the show in New York, but you got to work with wood." And I was like, "I'm not working with wood." But again, it was a challenge, and at the time I was reading the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Scoot. And it is, it's a phenomenal book, where she goes in and she talks about, she goes in and she talks with the family members of Henrietta Lacks. And anybody know Henrietta? Yes, got some knowledge? But I'm going to say it anyway, just in case.
Please.
But she was an African American who lived in Baltimore, and she was receiving care from Johns Hopkins University. And unfortunately, as you know, part of our American history, actually part of global history, is that people of African and brown, what I like to call brown and black people, are not necessarily treated fairly and appropriately and wholeheartedly as others. And so during her gynecological exam, another doctor came in and took scrapings from her, excuse me, from her exam, literally from her vagina, without her consent. And those cancerous cells basically have never died off. Like they've lived on since, because she was diagnosed in 1950, but by 1951 the cancer had metastasized all over her body, and I really don't think that they've owned up to what they have done to her. And it's not just what they've done to her, but it's also that her cells, because her cells never died, her cells are the impetus, the foundation of a multi-billion-dollar. And I don't even think multi-billion-dollar really, it doesn't really quantify the amount of her impact of her cells. You know, beyond the book that Rebecca Scoot, prior to that, because now that book is probably about 10 or 12 years old, but so about 13, maybe 12 years ago, not even Henrietta Lacks' family didn't even have insurance. But literally the reason why we have gone through, as a society, and don't have things like smallpox breakouts anymore, is because of this woman's genes, her cells. And so to me, it really triggered a need to carry a baton and say, oh, I want to continue this conversation. Not only because I have felt that way where you don't necessarily feel like you are respected, or don't feel like your words are being listened to, even in a doctor's appointment. Or when you are with someone and you're with a male counterpart and the male counterpart is being listened to
in the same space
and
as your advocate,
right,
but
you're not listened to. So things like that, that I definitely wanted to say, I've got to find a way to embody this in my work and continue this conversation.
Definitely. And so you're drawing parallels between women's bodies, in particular Black women's bodies,
yes, definitely,
and ecological serious challenges, right?
I am.
And so how are you doing that?
Something that I think is kind of instinctual. I have a 22-year-old child, and
Moms.
right. That's the reason I'm bringing that up, because I think that some of that comes along with motherhood. But I also think it comes along with womanhood.
Yes.
Because we tend to there's a certain amount of caring that we do for the world. That I also don't think is acknowledged and owned up to and in some sense given value to in the way that it should be. And I also think, and not that I don't, men, rather some of you guys do it, but unfortunately because of the slivering that happens to the woman, we get sectioned off into these sections and then we get pushed out into the world. And unfortunately, we're then only quantified based on these slivers. Is she sexy? Is she, I don't know, is she intelligent? And that's another conversation right there.
Of an age of childbearing? Is she, right, all of these other markers?
Yes.
Right? Yes. Is she nice? Right?
Oh.
Is she nice? Right, all of those things, exactly, right?
Yes, that can literally drive us crazy.
Yes.
If we didn't have some of the grounding factors that we were talking about, meaning that really root us into like earth, into family. And sometimes I think even generation by generation, if you're lucky enough to have that motherhood, like vibe, energy that's passed on. Because sometimes, unfortunately, because of the brokenness that can happen to families of color, it's not always passed on. Which is really, really unfortunate. That's true. Where you then have to seek it out in other places.
Exactly. From people who aren't biologically family.
Yes, but you can still get it.
Exactly, you can.
But you also have to know that, one, that you deserve it, one, that it belongs to you, and one that you can also, just like people have to adopt family, but that you have to adopt something that feels innate to you. So
Well, it's interesting to talk about that because that's a kind of generosity, right? And hope. And I think that Fertile Grounds is about generosity and hope, but it's also not a polite installation, right? It's not very polite, which is really interesting because of the materials, the plastics that surround it as an arrow shape that surround the dominant shape. These nodules that are made out of green plastic and covered with paint that spills over it, that's indicative of blood. And then this other thing that happens rising up to the ceiling, right? So let's talk about the parts of this that are intentionally not well behaved, and then the other parts that
it's like, why does it have to be that when we talk about the vagina, when we talk about women's health, when we talk about, I know you're doing this to, we planned this, I know.
Go for it.
But why does that have to be something that is not, that is triggered as, or identified as bad, or identified as, bloody, and therefore bloody means this.
Or violent.
Yes, or even aggression. Because I want to talk about the bodies that we live in and how we are treated and how, when it talks about the dividing of medical funding, how things that are supposed to be for women's health are not equally given to as those that are about men. Why is that bad?
Well, that's a really great question. Why is that bad? Why are people so afraid of women's bodies? In particular, not just external women, the external parts of our bodies, but the internal, right?
See, and it's not the external, they want to talk about the external part of our body. If you look at what's in the media, what's in the news, they want to talk about, but they like I said, they sliver us. So they only want to talk about the things that are identified as being of a certain type of value, which is basically sexualized to a certain extent. One of my goals, this might be silly, one of my goals for this talk was to say the word vagina a couple times.
Yes.
And I know that sounds, thank you.
That's right.
I know that sounds silly, but I think it's important.
But it's not. And if we could move into the talking sticks in a way and why this is above the activities that go that happen in wounds. Right?
So it's definitely about and definitely autobiographical. But also, like if you look at, I think it's about like 70 to 80% of women in general end up having some form of cyst and fibroid in their body throughout their lives at some point. And when I started researching that and the statistics around that, and the fact that because of and cysts and fibroids are overgrowth of the body, and they have not really narrowed down why they happen, but there's some theories about why they happen to some degree. And some of that is about, I think I mentioned earlier, but the manifestation of grief, or ailments that have not been identified, things that basically are in our bodies that we have not figured out how to dissolve. We have not figured out how to place back into the earth to some degree. And I really wanted to be able to have that, a visual of seeing that, like a 3D representation of the uterus. And I actually wanted the fibroids to be a little bit bigger, but sometimes you gotta work with what makes sense in relationship to aesthetics of an installation of an artwork. But the other thing for me was the carry-on. In my work, I try and create languages to some degree, base languages, and one of the languages that I've used since 2015 is the talking stick to reference issues, political issues, ecological issues, and health issues in relationship to women. So in one of my older installations, which was called Above All You Must Not Play at God, one of the sticks in that installation is called Without a Black Woman's Consent. And so literally I feel like I am carrying on that stick, that language, into this artwork and asking, what has been done without a Black woman's consent, what is still being done without her consent. So I see that as a continuation in this 3D form.
Thank you for talking about visual language, because that enters into this another question that I have is, your artistic expression has grown alongside your understanding of yourself, right? As a woman, as someone that has a variety of ways to identify yourself, and it has resulted in a set of symbols and motifs that are important to you. And then to this end, can someone who knows their work begin to read the language that's in this? What are some of the responses that you've received from people who have been following the work that can say, I understand what this particular part means because I've seen it in other pieces and I can carry that through? Because you're creating your own kind of language, but you're pulling from things that actually exist. Talking sticks exist in the world historically, and they're still used in different places. What does that mean for people that are seeing? Exactly.
Well, sometimes that's hard to get. I think sometimes it's actually hard to get that level of feedback from the individual person. Sometimes I will get that from very small, minuscule portions of that from things that are written about my work. But one of the ways I've definitely seen that, it comes out in, I do these talking stick workshops where I introduce my work. I introduce the story about in 2015 how I started to work with wood, and how I decided to use the branches and weave, take my my need to work with fabric and weave them through fabric branches, and how that represented Henrietta Lacks. So I began to have, I had a curator at the time who was at Salisbury University, and she said, we had a former student that came back and said, hey, I just need you guys to let you know that this was part of my experience as a brown and black person in that community, and we're looking for ways to have further open up a conversation about race and identity. So I was then commissioned to do a talking stick workshop. And so it was maybe 77 individuals from the community, the teachers, staff came to the workshop, and we literally go through creating talking sticks, and then I walk them through what talking sticks, why I made them, what they mean, and then I give them a chance to assign a particular notion or idea to the talking sticks, and we go through this process, and at the end there's a ceremonial release that happens, and it's really amazing because I give people the option to either carry their talking sticks home with them and or release them. And then the other part of the commission is then I create a work with the released talking sticks. But what's wild is that usually, like I've never had anybody take home the talking sticks. Not that they don't love them, but I think it's that they get the overall process of the creation, the assignment of value, but then also the release and how valuable they are, that continuum is together. And then, so throughout that, I had people tell me about what the creation meant to them, like literally creating the sticks. And then, of course, there are people that talk about your work, my work as well, and that's awesome. But in that context, it was more about, I don't know, it's more about their being present.
Yes.
And drawing on to the things that they wanted to work on, release, and let go. And I've definitely gotten tons of feedback from that, which was amazing.
And release and let go, and know that not all memories and histories have to be physically carried with us. Right?
Yes. And even those that needed to carry on, like for example, one of the six is supposed to represent something that you want to release. One of the six is supposed to represent something that you want to carry on. And so part of the overall goal is to get some people to realize that they too can carry on the conversation about race, the conversation about, you made me feel uncomfortable. They too can speak up for someone else that was put into a situation. And, right, so that was part of the overall overarching design of the workshop itself. And so it was amazing to see people, because everybody goes to the middle of the circle, and they talk about what they're releasing, and they talk about what they're carrying on. And I mean, there's been a couple that actually cried, yes, because you can hear it in what they have, what they are stating, but also when you go back and you look at the sticks, I mean, some of them are not the most aesthetically pleasing things, but you can see the wrapping, you can see the intention, you can see the thought that goes through, and it happens in the act of creating. And that's, to me, that's one of the ways that, I don't know, that is so fulfilling in relationship to me being an artist and me being, I think, an advocate.
And part of the community. And so you see that the response to the work and how it can function in a lot of different ways, right?
The manifestation of that.
With that in mind, I think this is a really great way to lead into the beautiful collection. So a few months ago, actually while you were in Rome, I started to see videos that Amber would post about her present sort of mind, where she was in her emotional state and her psychological state. And there was one in particular where it was just a video of you in gratitude. And I thought that was one of the most refreshing and welcoming images that I had seen on Instagram that day, to use Instagram as a platform. And it was really wonderful because it was in the midst of many videos and images that were full of heartbreak and tragedy on social media. But to see this particular video of you sitting and being grateful for, I don't know what, like the sun coming into your room. Will you talk a little bit about the beautiful collection?
So
and what it is and why you started it?
So the beautiful, I think I mentioned in 2015 something, not 2015, it was earlier than that, but when I was describing coming to the altar work, the works that resemble an altar, and having a traumatic family thing that occurred, and because I'm an artist, I try and find ways, and because I've known so early that I was an artist, I try and find ways to create in relationship to healing myself. And I don't know if what you guys think about healing and health, but what I've learned is that it's a continuous process. There is no one aspect of where you are then healed. I don't think that the world works in that way. And so just like exercising is like being healthy, it's a continuous process. So, you know, my family members would give me ideas, and through one exchange, I think it was suggested, hey, you know, just videotape, you know, what you're going through. Drop your ideas. And so literally I ended up beginning to just sit in front of my Mac for years. I got different Macs and like tons of video through years of just kind of downloading what I was going through into these videos. So the problem with that is because the videos were about, to some degree, pain and strife that I was going through, then I realized that, although I needed to continue this line of it, it couldn't be the only conversations I was having with myself. So then I said, I need to figure out how to talk about the joy in between. Because if we all have strife, but if we don't talk about and find ways to resonate the joy in between, you can get lost in the grief. You can get lost in the pain. So then I started thinking about things that gave me life, that gave me energy, that gave me joy. And so, like for example, there's one where I was, I sing. When my mom, when I was younger, my mom used to allow me to sing on our answering machine. You guys remember that? The answering machine? Yeah. So I thought I could sing back then. And my mom, you know, I love her dearly. She allowed me to do that. So you would call at my house. And, you know, my 16-year-old voice would be on that answering machine. So the reason I bring that up is because it brought me joy. And I had to pull all these memories back of being in a joyous state.
That's really beautiful.
And so that's what that's about, presenting that.
And you can find excerpts of the beautiful collection on Instagram.
You
right?
can. You can go to my
And
website.
It's on the website.
The beautiful collection is on one of the links on the left. Or Instagram.
I appreciate those videos so much. There was a time where I would seek them out, and now with all the algorithm changes, I really have to seek them out, and they're really special for me to witness and to witness you finding joy. The world, there's a lot of joy in the world, but we don't get to see it.
It doesn't get the same attention
No, it
as the
doesn't.
pain and the strife, and
Exactly.
we gotta figure that out.
Yeah,
Because that's part of the problem.
it's true.
And not that we shouldn't narrow in on some of the other, but there's got to be a balance.
Yeah. So, you were at the residency for 3 months.
Yep.
3 months, and your studio is upstairs. Okay. And what made you decide to come to the residency? What did that 3 months give you?
So I was approached by Dashboard, Beth Malone, almost 2.5, 3 years ago, and we set up a studio visit, and she was like, I love your work, we gotta find ways to pay you so we can work together. And I was like, yes, you know, I'm down with that plan. And then we, Stephanie was, you know, brought into the fold, and, or maybe I was brought into the fold, I don't know. But the conversation continued, and eventually we kept on having meetings, and the project kept on morphing, and then finally we came to the point where it's like, okay, we're gonna start this in mid-July. So one of the aspects reasonings why I wanted to be a part of it was because I really, after having a series, I guess, building a relationship with Stephanie and Beth, I really was touched by what's Stephanie's objective, her goal, her idea. And one of the ways that we did that was we came into the space. And so I've seen the space through the various, I guess, progress. And at first I was like, oh my God, this is a lot of work that needed to be done. But, you know, I just had faith. And I saw that she had faith. And that was really important. And also, you know, in my own way, I've always, because I've lived here, I've always tried to figure out ways that I can somewhat impact and be involved in, you know, the Ward 7 and Ward 8 community. So this was continuing to be able to do so, especially with being able to continue on the board after I leave this, you know, residency. So I wanted to find other ways to give, you know, and help the arts and culture in this area, in DC in general. And So that was why.
That's beautiful. And then also, I think that ties directly into the work that you do in Delusions of Grandeur and the Black Artists in DC. Community is really, really important to you. So could you talk a little bit more about that kind of commitment?
Yeah, so like I said, my family is from St. Thomas. I'm like truly Caribbean, like because of St. Thomas, Puerto Rico, St. John's, St. Croix, Tortola, and so.
How did you get here?
So my mother, she got a scholarship from Georgetown University, and so my father, myself, and my mom, that's how we got here. But what that meant was that my family was elsewhere. So I had to find, my mother had to find ways to find extended family, and then later as an adult, I had to find ways to find extended family. In doing so, the family issues that I referred to earlier, I was like, I need an art home. And not only an art home, but I needed a space that was multicultural. I needed to see Black and brown people, so much so because I'd gone to magnet schools earlier in my life in Arlington, Virginia. And although I won't take that back for anything, but I needed to balance the energy that I had gotten elsewhere. And so Black Artists of DC definitely, I will never ever, I will always value that experience. Like at the same time that I was introduced to Black Artists of DC, they helped me just make a decision to go to Howard University. So I felt once I was in Howard and being part of BADC, I felt like I was in a dual master's program. And it was a tremendous experience. And although I'm not as actively involved now, and I heard that in the bio, and I was like, I gotta edit that. Not that I don't want to, but once you start, some of the other things in your life start to evolve, you gotta make decisions. And one of those was,
shifting.
But they will always have my heart.
Well, it's interesting because there is, your commitment is not questioned, right? But you have to think about where you put your energy in. You are concentrating a lot more on your individual practice, right? And how expansive that practice is and has become, right? And also with your collective as well. And so it's just a shifting of energies that move into other areas. I want to talk with you about belonging because we started talking about this last time, and I think this is a real pleasure to be able to talk with Amber about this because as artists we tend to either be in our studios or we concentrate only within a particular regional, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And your idea of home and belonging takes place in multiple places, geographic places. But you said something interesting about belonging in home and how that was eternal. And I'd like you to talk about how you came to that. Because especially in the world, we're always looking for where we belong, right? And that's been really important to you.
Yeah. So for me, I don't necessarily have one place of belonging, one entity of home. I have places that I am drawn to because, like I said, like a cousin from the Caribbean, my family's migratory. It's you move in relationship to family, to income, economics, making money, and education. So it meant that I had to create ways of fostering home. I had to create ways of fostering an internal energy, to keep you going, because sometimes that can be what your family is for you. So there are things about certain parts of the world that draw that energy out of me. Like when I have definite memories of landing in St. Thomas and feeling the warmth and feeling like the air. And I love that. And the tan that you can get, the sun, how it kisses you in St. Thomas and in St. John. But at the same aspect, I love DC. DC, there's a certain pride, there's a certain I don't know, like entrenchment that happens for me, like in relationship to DC. But I literally think that home is about your internal energy.
Yeah.
And how you're able to either share and or manifest that with people that you love and that mean something to you.
Yeah, and you made this place home.
I tried.
You tried.
And I had help.
Yeah, right on, right on. So just to close out before we open up to questions from folks, what are some of the projects that you're working on now?
So I think I mentioned earlier that I'm going to have a solo exhibition. It's Universidad de Corazón,
Okay.
which is Sacred Heart University, and I'm really excited about that. So that's in April, and then in October we'll have another solo at American University. So those are the ones that are like on my
Focus. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. And it's going to take, you're going to use all this time to make the work and to think about the work.
Yeah.
I'm particularly happy about her upcoming show at AU because I'm there. So I'm just going to rope you into the visiting artist program.
Yes.
This is the ask. So, you guys have had some time to look at and experience the installation, and do you guys have any questions or comments or impressions that you could share with us and that Irma could respond to?
I'm curious about the floor. Yes, just I'll leave it at that. Whatever you like to say, comment about beyond the periphery. We've heard a little bit about the use of plastic and the trash. I'm wondering about what lies in between.
Okay. So the whole notion of fertile grounds, because
Yes.
it's a artificial grass. I tried to do the actual natural grass, but that just became a little cumbersome. But also, I play with a lot of geometric shapes, the juxtaposition of geometric shapes, lines. In this one, I went for triangular forms to form literally other representations of female anatomy. But also, if you look at the black and white, usually when I work with those, I use this to represent ethereal energy, like ancestral ethereal energy. And usually I will cut them out and literally then paste them to show a continuing flow of energy. But that was way too complicated to do for this one, so I used them in more of a solid form. But still, like the languages that I try and use, that it's a continuation of that. And it was really important that I showed, or at least attempted to show, how depending on how you feed something, depending whether it's feed through words, through love, through music, that it can go south or it can go north. And I wanted to show that the womb, just like as a metaphysical representation of the earth, that what we put into it can manifest either or. So,
I wanted to ask sort of about the process of like developing the idea for this project, like the cultivation for it. Was it something that sort of has been building for a while, or did you sort of come to it more like recently, like, oh, I want to do a piece about this, or like tell us about the sort of cultivation?
So, okay, that's a good question. I have literally, my niece, my brother Alonzo, his daughter, Tazima, and I have been cutting these plastics for at least 3 years, for as long as this conversation has been going. I kind of knew that at least that it would have the plastic. I didn't know the other portions of it. I just knew that I wanted to talk about plastic and how it's been infringing on our progress in relation to the earth. So some of it is literally my own waste, but also at the end when we needed more, we definitely worked with some of the people in the community to collect. So that was one of the main aspects that I just knew I was going to work with plastic. And then as I said, some of it is autobiographical, and so once I went through something in my own health, I knew, oh, this is what I'm going to create about. I've been thinking about how do I talk about this, you know, and there's a song by India Arie, and I've always loved her work, and I think it was like the song about what is my hair, or
I am not my
I
hair.
am not my hair. It was one of those songs where it was so very, very instinctually personal for her, but because it was so, and because she's a woman of color, that it also affected other women of color. And I remember,
I remember that song. It was so
it was empowering.
Yeah.
But I remember her talking about it in relationship to someone asking her whether or not she knew that she was going to make this anthem or anything. And she literally said, "Well, I don't make my work for anybody else but myself." And at first, when I heard her say it, I was like, "What do you mean you don't make your work?" But it just dawned on me that in relationship to, if you're not good with what you put out into the world, it has to be to some degree, for your highest good. And if it is for your true highest good, then it will be good for others, you know? And so I had to keep on having that conversation with myself, because, you know, basically putting what I call a three-dimensional uterus out in the world and saying, hey, can we talk about women's health? You know, and yes, saying part of this is definitely, you know, autobiographical. I really had to come to terms with, how do you have that conversation with people and not like literally, you know, them try and get into your business, you know? And so I definitely, that was also that was a very large part of how do I manifest something that is personal, but also speaks on a global level in relationship to women. And well, if we don't have women, you know, where's the world? And if women are not healthy, where is the world? So ultimately, that's what I'm asking to some degree. But I think you're also talking about more like the technical or the...
No, it's just like the formation of the idea, like how you came to think like, okay, let me do this thing about women's health and women's bodies, but also like the health of the earth, like how forming that idea.
Well, I also think that some of that is also entrenched in my work in general.
Yeah.
It just so happened that this particular one was... because of where my life is, it synced a little bit more personally, which, you know, so does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
I don't know why you chose the wall. Why you chose that color for the wall?
I needed a color that would, because sometimes when I work with cylinder-like forms in relationship to the talking sticks, what happens is that you get it when you're in person, when you feel some of the energy that I'm trying to convey. But what happens when it comes to photographing and or documenting, what I realize is when there's not solid mass behind it, it changes what you visually take away from the imagery.
So the choice of the color doesn't have anything to do with the vagina? Because that's where I'm confused. Because the installation is about the vagina, and I'm looking at that color in the back, and I'm trying to find a relationship.
No, it does not have anything to do with the vagina. It has to do with being able to aesthetically take in what you're seeing outside of this room. Meaning, without when you hit it with video, when you hit it with photography, you will not be able to see the three-dimensionality of it without the background solid mass. And so it's just based on creating installations like this in the past, and I knew I had to handle directly that particular issue.
I think that's such a great question, because I interpreted it as something that reflected the color of the artificial fibroids. And I was also thinking about the kind of blue dye of staining of slides, of medical slides, a variation of that. So I was thinking about that, but that's good to know, because we tend to aestheticize some things to make them approachable to look at.
Well, yeah, I mean, because when you're looking at it, even in slide or on a photograph or anything, I, as a person looking at the installation, I'm going to want to understand what does that color have to do with the subject matter. And it's very important to me to understand what I'm looking at.
I get that.
I'm with you.
And some of the other things that I have to say in relationship to like my production of work is that I also I also have to just listen to spirit,
Mhm.
what I connect with as spirit. And so once we decided, I commissioned my brother to create the actual fibroids. And so once he started to present like ideas about what to make it with. And once I saw that color, I was like, oh, it's this one that I want. Because I knew that once we poured the paint to represent blood over it, it was going to be the juxtaposition of these two colors. I knew it was going to work, and I needed a color that was one, not in the actual formation of the sticks. So it was a whole bunch of thoughts, like decisions that came that impacted that particular color.
And it makes sense because every part of it means something, and so the wall would mean something too.
Yeah. And as an artist, especially when you're doing installation art, there's some points where you have to yes, you have to step away. You have to evaluate, like literally, what is my message versus how my message intention versus how someone else, a range of people will perceive the actual finished project.
Especially when the way that most people will perceive it is through images that are
Yes.
online, right?
Yes, and I knew that to be able to draw people in here, that it had to be something you could
Yeah.
digest aesthetically in a certain way. So that was the way I did it.
All of those, talk about the dilemmas of being an artist and living in an age where we end up putting things on social media or they exist on a screen
And they have a life of their own.
and having to think about things like that. Yeah, I mean, wouldn't it be great if people would only come to spaces to see the work in person, right? But we're left
That's
with
not the art world we're living in right now. Yeah.
Right.
I actually don't even think that's the world we're living in right now because of how much media has taken up
Yeah.
so much of our attention and time, and then thus where our money and energy is put into.
It's true. It's true. Hey.
Hi.
Two questions.
Go ahead. Thanks for having us. My question is about how does doing work that is very personal to you as a woman about your body, how has that like changed you, if at all?
That's a good question. I think that for me, it's just been real important for me to be as what I would consider as authentic as possible. And like I said, like in relation to the India song and her reasoning for why she created, and I almost feel like if I don't bring up some of the things that I think that I know impact me and therefore impact others, and specifically for women, then I'm all, to some degree, I'm dampening my own energy, dampening my own voice. And I think, like I said, some of that is also based on how I was raised, that my voice was given value, my ideas were given value. So it's like almost to some extent built in me to have to do some of that.
An obligation.
Yeah. And it gets on my nerves sometimes. I cannot lie. It's heavy some days. It's absolutely heavy.
You know, it's interesting too, your question, because we don't always have expectations of the kinds of engagement that we have with people, and we don't always recognize the kinds of shifts in our thinking that happen when we are talking or we sort of meet someone. And in that same way, the work does that too, through the act of meeting and reflecting on that. There are things that shift, the ways of thinking that shift, ways of thinking that shift about our own body, or limitations in our body, and the limitations of our own thinking.
Especially as we age.
And I'd love to talk about that. But it's a really good question, because we make assumptions that we're just making, we're just doing, and don't take into account that kind of the transformative effect of making.
Also, I noticed that the more art I see, and the more Black women artists' art that I take in, I see this obligation thing where they're like shining a light on an issue or something,
Yeah.
whether it be personal or whether it be kind of like a theme. And then also as a Caribbean woman, I feel like we often like evangelize, women's things. Like there's a community there, doesn't matter like what island you're from. There's like a collective, whether you come bring food to someone's house or whether you are their voice when they can't be their own voice. So it's always interesting to me to see how black women show up in art still, even though they show up, in other ways too.
Yeah, but I actually like that not that we have to do it, but that we still choose to do it.
Yeah.
And or that women still choose to do it.
To talk about concerns particular to us.
Yeah. Because like I said, it's heavy. It can get heavy. And you can also get penalized for it, depending on where you are in your career, where you are in your families, depending on some of the more, what's the stringent thinking that historically people have. So, kudos to those that do.
Well, abstraction is reigning these days, and folks make the assumption that abstraction doesn't have anything to say, and it really does. And so often
Or it
abstraction
actually can't, because I don't think it always does.
it doesn't always do it, but when and this is a form of abstraction where it starts to operate as code, right? And code in certain cultures, right? Symbols in cultures, metaphor in certain cultures, are a way of moving through content that might be heavy or something that only you should know, right? And it requires that you have the same kind of language in some form or fashion. So I too am really happy when people lay very transparently what their concerns are.
Yeah.
And
I think through abstraction, I've been able to, at least I attempt to. So for example, I think some people, especially specifically this area, they know my work for the installations that I create, the large fabric installations that are tied and or woven through chicken wire. And so people are, so I've been told and I've seen it, people are drawn to it by the color and the shape and the form, the density. But it's not until it's those that look deeper in relationship to my actual meaning behind the chicken wire installations, because literally I'm talking about the balance of society, the juxtaposition of masculine and feminine energy. I take the chicken wire that represents masculine forms. It's hard, it's rigid to some degree. It's a grid, exactly. And it's metal. But it's still firm. But I weave it with fabric. With this malleable thing, and it's a juxtaposition that's talking about literally how we live in a patriarchal system, and how we treat women, and then therefore how we treat children. So there's many things you can do with abstraction. But it's also about what you want to get from the abstracted information.
There was another
Yeah,
question.
sorry.
No, it's fine. I'm just kind of curious about your, artistic process. Do you know the form, or did you know the form you wanted this installation to take, or did it take shape as you began to create? Did you know how you wanted to work in this space, or, figure it out as you went along, I guess?
Yeah, so sometimes it's elements that I know, and then as I begin to, depending on the length of time that I have with a particular project and or what other projects I'm working on, then as that kind of narrows in, and through the research that I do, the elements then begin to connect. They finite, For example, the other thing that I forgot to mention is that the reason they are in triangular forms is because they're representing DNA, the helix, the double helix. So I knew that I was going to use talking sticks, because it represents a conversation about women, I knew that I was going to figure out how the hell to make them into double helixes. I knew that I was going to have the fabric. I knew that it was going to be hanging from the ceiling. I knew that, I did not know that I was going to end up having to use substrate. That's a whole other conversation. But then I had to then infringe that, kind of merge that into the overall concept, and that meant that I had to then figure out substrates for the bottom and the top. I knew that I wanted lines through it. But all those things, and it's funny because you can see it, everything I mentioned there, but all those things did not have a cohesive imagery at that point, early on.
Until you started to actually
Until I
create the work of art.
Well, no, until I started, because for this type of project, I have to actually do drawings, renderings, and things like that. But there are some works that I don't have to do that because the languages, I've worked with the languages so long that all I need to know is that I'm going to use this, this, and this, and then I just create it. But this one, yeah, I had to do a series of drawings and just this little bit of research. Yeah.
Thank you.
Appreciate the question.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
I want to say real quick that I asked Zoe, I don't even know how we came to you coming, doing the studio visit, because I invited her here.
I saw it online and on Instagram.
Yes.
Love Instagram. We were talking about, this was another kind of conversation.
It was.
And it was out
Totally
like,
a
I'm
conversation.
coming to see your show. And then we were in the same space with Stephanie. And and we just said, hey, we're gonna do this next Wednesday. And
But
then
at that point, it was just a studio visit.
I know it was just a studio
Yes,
visit.
meaning her coming to see the space.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we got to talking, we talked about health, and she was like, girl, what's going on with you? She was like, girl, what's going on with you?
Yeah,
And she was like, we should do a talk.
yeah.
Yes, well, let's do that. So I want to
Because
say
this
thank
was-
you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It was a pleasure. This is a
Yes,
pleasure.
thank you.
And besides, this work and your work needs to be discussed, right? It needs to be in conversation with